Prince William and Kate Middleton's daughter Charlotte may be a princess, but she is the queen.
The palace gates stood silent beneath a fading afternoon sky until everything shifted. Princess Charlotte stepped forward, blocking Queen Camilla's daughter mid-entrance, her calm expression freezing the moment. Shock rippled through onlookers. Whispers turned to stunned silence. Was this playful defiance, a quiet assertion of rank, or something far more calculated? Faces tightened, tension rose, and even seasoned royals hesitated. Because what happened next, her reaction, unmistakable and unfiltered, didn't just break protocol. It exposed something no one was prepared to see. The moment the gates didn't open. The palace entrance had always been a place of quiet order, where movements were smooth, expected, and rarely questioned. On that afternoon, everything followed that same familiar rhythm, until it didn't. As the gates stood partially open, anticipation lingered in the air. Queen Camilla's daughter approached with the quiet confidence of someone who had never needed permission to pass. Her steps were steady, her expression composed, her expectation clear. Entry was assumed. But just before that expectation could become reality, something shifted. Without warning, Princess Charlotte moved forward. There was no rush in her step, no visible uncertainty. She placed herself directly at the entrance, her small frame now forming a clear and unmistakable barrier. It was not accidental positioning, nor was it the playful wandering of a child. Her stance was firm, her posture deliberate, and her gaze steady in a way that immediately altered the atmosphere around her. Conversations faltered, movements slowed, attention turned. For a brief moment, the scene seemed almost suspended in time. Camilla's daughter paused, clearly not expecting resistance, least of all from someone so young. The hesitation that followed was subtle, but impossible to ignore. She adjusted her footing, as if waiting for the situation to correct itself, as if this interruption would quickly dissolve into explanation or apology. But it didn't. Charlotte didn't move. There was no sign of hesitation in her expression, no glance backward for approval, no indication that she was about to step aside. Instead, she held her position with a calm confidence that felt far beyond her years. The silence between them stretched, growing heavier with each passing second. What could have been dismissed as a passing moment began to feel something else entirely, something intentional. The message, though unspoken, was clear. This was not about confusion or miscommunication. It was not a mistake. The way Charlotte stood there, composed, unshaken, suggested awareness, control, even a quiet kind of authority. And that was what made the moment so striking. It didn't carry the unpredictability of childish behavior. It carried the weight of a decision. Around them, the reaction was immediate, though restrained. Members of the household exchanged quick, uncertain glances. Some seemed amused at first, expecting the tension to break into laughter. Others remained still, sensing that something more significant was unfolding beneath the surface, because what they were witnessing wasn't simply a delay at a gate, it was a disruption of expectation. For Camilla's daughter, the moment became increasingly difficult to navigate. Her initial confidence gave way to visible uncertainty. She stood there, caught between reacting and waiting, unsure whether to challenge the situation or allow it to pass. And still, Charlotte remained exactly where she was. Unmoving, unapologetic, completely in control of the space she had claimed. What began as a routine entrance had transformed into something far more revealing. The gate, once just a physical boundary, now felt symbolic, representing something unspoken about presence, about positioning, about who could decide when a line could be crossed. And as the silence deepened and the tension quietly spread, one thing became impossible to ignore. This was not just a moment. It was a statement still unfolding. What seemed like a simple entrance quietly unraveled into a powerful signal, turning a gate into a symbol of control, presence, and unseen authority. As silence lingered and tension grew, was this hesitation accidental, or a deliberate message still unfolding before everyone watching? Stay with us. The silence that revealed everything. The stillness at the gate did not break. Instead, it deepened, settling into something far more uncomfortable than anyone had anticipated. What had begun as a moment of interruption now shifted its focus entirely. All attention turned to the reaction unfolding in real time. Queen Camilla's daughter, who had approached with quiet certainty, now found herself standing in a situation she had not prepared for. At first, the change in her expression was subtle. A brief pause, a slight tightening around the eyes, the kind of reaction that might go unnoticed in a different setting. But here, in the controlled environment of a royal entrance, even the smallest shift carried meaning. Her composure, once steady, began to falter in ways that were difficult to hide. The expectation of immediate access had been interrupted, and in its place came hesitation. She attempted to recover. There was a small adjustment in posture, a measured breath, and the faintest suggestion that she might step forward regardless. It was the kind of response that suggested she still believed the moment would correct itself, that this unexpected resistance would give way, that protocol would quietly restore order. But as she made that subtle move, the reality became clear. Princess Charlotte did not move. There was no shift in her stance, no softening in her expression. If anything, her calm seemed to sharpen. She remained exactly where she had placed herself, her presence steady and unchallenged. A faint trace of amusement touched her face, not exaggerated, not playful in the usual sense, but controlled. It was the kind of expression that suggested awareness, as if she understood the weight of the moment and chose to hold it there. The silence between them grew heavier. It was no longer just a pause. It became a space filled with uncertainty, with unspoken questions, with the quiet tension of two individuals locked in a moment neither could easily resolve. Around them, the atmosphere shifted again. Conversations that had already slowed now stopped completely. Onlookers watched closely, not because they expected confrontation, but because they sensed something more revealing was taking place. Camilla's daughter hesitated once more, caught between response and restraint. There was a visible effort to maintain control, to restore the composure that had defined her entrance. But the longer the moment stretched, the more difficult that became. Her reaction, once measured, now carried traces of discomfort. It was not dramatic, not openly emotional, but it was unmistakable. And that was what made it so striking, because across from her stood Charlotte, unchanged. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just a quiet, steady confidence that seemed to anchor the entire scene. Her expression remained composed, her posture firm, her presence undeniable. She was not reacting to the tension, she was holding it. What unfolded in those few seconds went beyond surprise. It revealed something deeper, something that could not be dismissed as a simple misunderstanding or a playful exchange. The contrast between them became impossible to ignore. On one side, expectation meeting resistance. On the other, control without explanation. And in that contrast, a subtle imbalance emerged, not one defined by words or titles, but by presence, by the way the moment shifted, by who adjusted and who did not. It was a quiet exposure of something rarely seen so clearly within the carefully managed world of the royal family. The gate remained closed, the silence remained unbroken, and the reaction, still unfolding, continued to say far more than anyone had expected. In a world defined by protocol, one silent moment revealed more than titles ever could. The gate stayed closed, the stillness lingered, and every reaction spoke volumes. But did this quiet shift expose a hidden truth the monarchy can no longer contain? Keep watching. What the moment truly meant. As the silence lingered and the tension refused to dissolve, the moment at the gate began to take on a different weight. What had unfolded in front of the palace entrance no longer felt like a passing interruption or a light-hearted exchange. It demanded interpretation. Those who witnessed it, whether directly or from a distance, found themselves asking a question that could not be easily dismissed. Was this simply playful behavior from a young royal, or was there something more deliberate beneath it? Within the palace, quiet discussions began to form. Observers who understood the subtle language of royal conduct did not focus only on what had happened, but on how it had happened. Princess Charlotte had not rushed into position or reacted impulsively. Her movement had been measured, her stance had been intentional, and most importantly, her refusal to step aside had been consistent. These were not the traits of a fleeting, childish act. They suggested awareness, even if unspoken. Some began to consider whether Charlotte had been asserting her presence in a way that could not be ignored. Not through words, not through formal declaration, but through action. The kind of action that quietly redefines how a moment is understood. Others wondered if she had been testing boundaries, exploring how far she could go within a system known for its structure and expectation. It was also possible that her response had been instinctive, a natural expression of confidence that required no deeper strategy. But as the moment was revisited again and again, one detail continued to stand out. Queen Camilla's daughter had approached the gate with a clear expectation. Her position within the family, her experience, and her composure all suggested that entry would be immediate and unquestioned. Yet when faced with resistance, that expectation did not translate into control. Instead, it shifted into hesitation. Her reaction, though restrained, carried the weight of someone adjusting to a situation that had not followed the expected path. In contrast, Charlotte did not adjust. She did not recalibrate her stance or look for guidance. Her presence remained steady from the moment she stepped forward. There was no visible effort to maintain control, because control never seemed to leave her. This contrast became the center of the interpretation. It was not about status or age. It was about presence. One appeared to claim the space naturally. The other appeared to respond to it. And that was where the meaning of the moment began to evolve. The act of blocking the gate was no longer just a physical gesture. It became symbolic, a quiet demonstration of who could shape the moment without raising their voice, who could alter expectations without breaking form. The gate itself, once just an entry point, now represented something larger. It stood as a boundary not only of space but of influence. Those reflecting on the incident could not ignore how effortlessly the dynamic had shifted. No formal rule had been invoked. No instruction had been given. Yet the outcome had been clear. One person had stopped. The other had not moved. The question was no longer whether the moment had been playful. It was what that playfulness had revealed. Silence lingered as the moment replayed, revealing a shift no rule had declared, yet impossible to ignore. One paused, the other stood firm. Was it harmless play, or a subtle display of power that quietly redefined everything? Let's find out. Laughter, looks, and quiet calculations. As the tension at the gate slowly eased and movement resumed, the moment did not disappear. It followed everyone inside. What had unfolded at the entrance lingered in the air, carried into hallways, across rooms, and into quiet conversations that began forming almost immediately. On the surface, the atmosphere shifted toward lightness. A few smiles appeared. Soft laughter spread among members of staff who had witnessed the exchange. To many, it had been unexpected, even amusing. A young royal holding her ground in such a bold way was not something they were used to seeing. But beneath that surface reaction, something else was taking place. The palace had always been a place where even the smallest moments were observed, weighed, and remembered. And this moment, though brief, had left an impression that could not be ignored. Staff members exchanged glances that carried more than humor. There was curiosity in those looks, a quiet awareness that what they had just seen might carry more meaning than it first appeared. Within the family, reactions began to take shape, each one reflecting a different perspective. Prince William was among those who viewed the situation with a more measured concern. While the moment may have seemed harmless to some, he understood the importance of image and perception. The royal family existed under constant public scrutiny, and even a small incident could quickly take on a larger narrative. For him, the question was not whether it had been amusing, but how it might be interpreted beyond palace walls. His reaction remained controlled, but there was a clear sense that he was thinking ahead, considering the balance between personality and responsibility. In contrast, Catherine, Princess of Wales, responded with a softer perspective. There was a visible sense of amusement in her reaction, a quiet appreciation for the confidence and spirit that had been displayed. She had always encouraged individuality and expression in her children, and this moment, though unexpected, reflected that same energy. At the same time, her response was not without reflection. Beneath the amusement was an understanding that such moments, while genuine, carried weight within a family bound by tradition. Then there was King Charles III, whose response was perhaps the most carefully balanced. Known for his ability to navigate complex situations with calm diplomacy, he chose not to elevate the moment beyond what it appeared to be. Publicly, and even within the palace, he framed it as light-hearted, a simple moment of youthful confidence. His tone remained steady, his reaction measured, as if guiding others to see it as nothing more than a brief interruption in an otherwise routine day. Yet even in that calm response, there was an underlying awareness, because while laughter had softened the edges of what happened, it had not erased it. The moment was still being considered, still being quietly evaluated by those who understood how the royal environment functioned. Every action, every reaction, every expression carried significance, whether acknowledged openly or not. What had seemed like a fleeting scene at the gate had now become a point of quiet reflection inside the palace. It was being discussed in subtle ways, not as an incident to be corrected, but as one to be understood. And as the day continued, the smiles remained, the laughter echoed softly, but the observations ran deeper. Inside the palace, that fleeting moment at the gate lingered, quietly dissected not as error, but meaning. Smiles held, laughter echoed. Yet something shifted beneath composure. Was this subtle reflection the first sign of an unspoken change unfolding behind closed doors? Stay glued. A quiet adjustment behind composure. As the palace settled into its usual rhythm, the ripple from the gate incident did not fade for everyone. While conversations softened and daily routines resumed, the moment continued to hold a quiet significance, especially for Queen Camilla. Outwardly, her reaction had been composed and light. She had joined in the laughter, acknowledging the scene as an unexpected but harmless display of youthful confidence. To those watching, it appeared as though she had dismissed it with ease. But beneath that calm exterior, a different process had begun. The situation had placed her daughter in an unfamiliar position, one that was difficult to overlook. The expectation of a smooth entrance had been disrupted, not by circumstance, but by someone younger who chose not to step aside. Though no words were exchanged, the effect had been visible. It was not dramatic, not openly confrontational, yet it carried a subtle sense of imbalance that lingered long after the moment had passed. For Camilla, this was not simply about a brief interruption at a gate. It was about what that interruption suggested. She had spent years navigating the complexities of royal life, carefully shaping her role within an institution built on tradition and hierarchy. Every appearance, every interaction, every decision had been approached with intention. Control, in that environment, was not something assumed. It was something maintained through awareness and careful positioning. And yet, in that brief moment, control had shifted in a way that was neither planned nor expected. The realization was not immediate, but it was undeniable. The dynamics within the family were evolving. The younger generation, represented so clearly in that moment, carried a different kind of presence. It was less formal, less restrained, and yet it held a natural confidence that was difficult to manage through traditional expectations alone. Charlotte had not challenged authority in a direct way. She had simply acted, and in doing so had changed the flow of the situation without effort. That was what made it significant. Privately, Camilla began to reassess what this meant. Not as a threat, but as a shift. The influence she had worked to establish was still there, but it was no longer the only force shaping how moments unfolded within the family. The visibility of younger royals, their ability to capture attention and alter perception so naturally, introduced a new layer to the dynamic. Her daughter's experience at the gate became part of that reflection. It was not something to dwell on publicly, but it could not be ignored internally. The moment had revealed how quickly expectation could be challenged, how easily presence could redefine a situation. Rather than resisting this change, Camilla's response began to take a different direction. She did not attempt to correct or confront what had happened. There was no effort to impose a stricter structure or to limit the expression that had been displayed. Instead, her approach became more observant, more adaptive. She began to understand that the strength of the monarchy did not rest solely in maintaining tradition, but in recognizing when those traditions were being reshaped by those who would carry them forward. The shift was quiet, almost unnoticeable to those outside the immediate circle. But it was there. Silence replaced correction as she chose observation over control, allowing change to unfold quietly within tradition itself. Did this subtle restraint reveal a deeper evolution of power, or mark the precise moment her image and the monarchy's future began transforming irreversibly? Stay tuned. The moment that reshaped her image. As the internal reflections within the palace continued, the story did not remain confined behind its walls. What had unfolded at the gate began to move outward, carried through conversations, observations, and eventually into the wider public space. The reaction beyond the palace grew quickly, almost unexpectedly. What had seemed like a contained moment of tension and quiet significance was now being viewed through an entirely different lens. Princess Charlotte became the center of that attention. The image of her standing firm at the gate, calm and unmoved, began to circulate in discussions among royal watchers and observers. It was not just the act itself that drew interest, but the way she had carried it out. There was a clarity in her posture, a confidence in her stillness that people found difficult to overlook. The moment, simple in action, began to take on a larger meaning in the public eye. Descriptions started to form around her. She was being seen as bold, not in a loud or disruptive way, but in a quiet, assured manner that felt natural rather than forced. Some described her as a royal who did not follow a script, someone who responded to situations as they unfolded instead of adhering strictly to expectation. That perception, once introduced, spread quickly. It resonated with those who were used to seeing the monarchy through a more controlled and formal lens. What stood out most was the sense of authenticity. There was nothing exaggerated in her behavior, no visible attempt to perform or impress. She had simply acted, and that simplicity made the moment more powerful. To the public, it suggested a kind of honesty that felt refreshing. A young royal who did not appear constrained by the weight of tradition, yet still held herself with composure. It created a contrast that was both striking and compelling. Confidence became another defining feature of how she was perceived. Not the confidence that comes from position or title, but the kind that is expressed through presence. The ability to stand still when expected to move, to remain composed when others hesitate. That confidence, displayed so clearly in a single moment, began to shape how people understood her role within the royal family. There was also an element of unpredictability that drew attention. The monarchy had long been associated with structure and predictability. Moments were planned, appearances were managed, and behavior followed established patterns. Charlotte's action at the gate did not disrupt that structure in a dramatic way, but it introduced something different, a sense that not every moment would unfold as expected, that even within a system built on tradition, individuality could still emerge. This contrast became a central part of the narrative. On one side stood the traditional image of the monarchy, defined by formality and continuity. On the other stood a young princess whose presence suggested a subtle shift towards something more personal, more relatable. The balance between those two images created a new kind of interest, one that extended beyond the moment itself. As the attention continued to grow, it became clear that this was not a temporary wave of interest. The gate incident had done more than capture attention. It had redefined how Charlotte was seen, not just within the family, but in the broader public imagination. What had been a brief moment of stillness at an entrance had turned into a lasting impression, one that continued to shape the narrative around her. And as that narrative evolved, so did the expectations that came with it. In a single paused moment at the gate, perception shifted, transforming how Charlotte was seen across both family and public gaze. Did that quiet defiance reveal a deeper signal of future authority, or was it simply a fleeting moment misunderstood? Let's find out the details. The meaning behind the stand. As attention around the gate incident continued to grow, the focus slowly widened beyond the moment itself. What had taken place was no longer viewed only as a brief exchange at a palace entrance. It began to represent something larger, something that touched on deeper themes within the royal family. Observers, both inside and outside the palace, started to revisit the scene with a different perspective, looking not just at what happened, but at what it might suggest about what comes next. The image remained clear: Princess Charlotte standing firm at the gate, unmoving, composed, in control of a space that, for a brief moment, she defined entirely on her own terms. Opposite her, Queen Camilla's daughter, caught in a pause that revealed how quickly expectations could shift. It was a simple interaction, yet the balance within it had been unmistakable. That balance became the center of discussion. Some began to see the moment as part of a generational shift, one that had been quietly unfolding but rarely seen so clearly. The younger members of the royal family were not rejecting tradition, but they were engaging with it differently. Their presence carried a natural confidence that did not rely on formal structure alone. Charlotte's action reflected that change. She did not challenge the system directly, yet she influenced the moment in a way that could not be ignored. At the same time, the incident brought attention to the contrast between control and natural authority. Control, within the royal setting, had long been associated with experience, position, and careful management of public image. It was something maintained through consistency and adherence to established expectations. Natural authority, however, appeared differently. It was not assigned or announced. It was expressed through presence, through the ability to shape a moment without effort or explanation. In that brief exchange at the gate, both forms were visible. One adjusted, the other remained steady. This contrast added another layer to how the moment was understood. It also raised questions about the balance between tradition and evolution. The monarchy had always relied on continuity, on the preservation of its structure across generations. Yet, as each new generation emerged, subtle changes began to take shape. Charlotte's action did not disrupt tradition, but it introduced a sense of adaptability. It showed that even within a system built on history, there was space for individuality to influence how that history continued. The gate itself began to take on a symbolic meaning. It was no longer just a physical barrier marking an entrance. It became a representation of something more abstract, a point where expectation meets reality, a place where presence determines outcome. In that moment, the question was not simply who had the right to pass through, but who had the ability to define the situation unfolding in front of it. As the scene continued to be revisited, the meaning remained open to interpretation. Some saw it as a light-hearted display of personality. Others saw it as a subtle indication of changing dynamics within the family. But what could not be dismissed was the clarity of the moment itself, the stillness, the reactions, the unspoken understanding that something had shifted, even if only slightly. And as those reflections continued to unfold, the focus returned once more to the image that had started it all. Not just a gate, but the figure standing in front of it. So, what do you think? Was Princess Charlotte's silent stand at the gate just playful defiance, or a quiet signal that royal power is shifting beneath the surface? We'd love your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.